or Venmo, as so many of you are doing. You're generous. John Carlos said, the bottom line is if you stay home, your message stays home with you. If you stand for justice and equality, you have an obligation to find the biggest possible megaphone to let your feelings be known. Don't let your message be buried, and don't bury yourself. Now it's time for our reading. Barbara, we will look to you.
Spirit of abundance, God of grace, Mother of hope. We pause now to remember those stories that are all around us, but so often passed over. Those stories that, when told, are shared because of what someone is, not who they are.
This month in our nation's character is Black
History Month.
Help us realize that Black history is all our history.
May the day come when these stories are so wildly taught that no month need be separately divided. We know this day will not come until we as a people make more informed and hospitable choices.
We pray now
for
those
those
new
new
choices. May we come to see a day where the prison system becomes redemptive, not punitive. A day where the legal system learns to focus more squarely on the facts and not the color of their skin.
A day where our schools are as well funded as the needs demand. May our role models be allowed to excel when they thrive and not be taken down for their rich heritage.
We know
this will require
a shift of
shift in
power,
and
and
this
can be
can be
scary
scary
for
for
some. Give
Give
those
those
full of
full
fear
hope.
may we come to know
No
the
grace.
So that our hearts will not be hardened to the pain around us, including the pain of despotism, fascism, and war in the world. There are so many beautiful stories needing to be told, and we need to get the chance to hear them.
widen our vision
So that the history that is shared this month
And every month.
comes to be known as
our
history too. We are
most
human
human
and seek
the humanity in others.
Let us pray, and Shella will once again lead us.
Holy Spirit, we, as always, invite you into this space. And we thank you for every person in this space and how the wisdom and understanding that we get from this space will go into many other spaces because of who you've made us to be. And we're grateful. We are grateful for life and health. We do thank you that you know and see. You're a God that knows and sees. And so we thank you for our brothers and sisters like Nick and Maya, who are in the struggle right now in Ukraine, and for so many others who are there in the struggle, and for the Ukrainian and Russian, both sons and daughters, who are being forced to fight and being forced to stand up for what they believe and to stand up for their countries. God, you're a miraculous, a miracle working God. You can change the hearts and minds of people. So even as soldiers are going out, Lord, you're able to work in their hearts and in their minds. And so we thank you so much for that. We do stand, Lord God, against the powers of darkness and greed and wickedness that would try to destroy those whom you love, your creation, your people. And so we come against those who say they know God, yet their heart is far from you. And in their own thoughts, they think of themselves as bigger than they are. And they're trying to take over and destroy. We come against that. It will change and turn their hearts back to you. And for people who stand in marginalized positions in our country and in other countries and across this world, Father, that you will reach out and strengthen their voices and help them to be heard. And we praise you in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Shella. Let's just pause and be conscious of the Ukrainian people, President Zelensky. The people who are practicing medicine right now, caregivers, disabled people, children, infants, mothers, fathers. Okay, everybody, take a moment to welcome somebody into your presence today. Welcome back, everybody. I'm hoping that we don't take for granted the transcendence that we have together and how it has to be overflowing into our homes, our workspaces, our communities. We are really honored to once again host Dr. Watkins. He is quite the worker. He is in the trenches. He is busy, and yet he has taken time on his Sunday, which I would presume would be a time for him to have a break, but he's taken time to be with us. The reason, the way that I heard about him originally is because I subscribed to LGBTQ Nation. And I had never heard of him until I saw that he was selected as their hero of the year for the year 2020. And back then he graciously accepted my invitation. And what a wonderful experience it was to just to have him among us. I will never forget how Dr. Watkins led us to take a second look at the story known as that of the Prodigal Son, and to ask ourselves what might be the reason that this son felt he needed to leave home. And Julian, being the son of a Southern preacher himself, that just, being the gay son of a Southern preacher, just gave it more force as he spoke to us from his heart. He's a public health official, professional and clinician who's deeply concerned about the mass trauma inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic. He firmly believes that communities will need new and creative pathways to healing, to recover from the pandemic. He believes that to truly make ourselves whole, we're going to need to address the age-old crisis of white supremacist delusion and systemic racism in meaningful ways. He created the People's Project as a part of an artist residency with Beverly's Lower Manhattan Art Gallery and event space. The People's Project is a collaborative multimedia project and a creative vehicle to bring community voices from the margins to the center of future building and recovery efforts. Dr. Watkins' mission is to help create a new culture that challenges narratives that seek to pathologize marginalized communities and to replace them with considered and careful discourse to build community, raise consciousness, and promote non-market values such as sacrifice, resource sharing, caring, justice, healing, restoration, and love. And I remember reading that, you know, before the pandemic, before the work that, much of the work that he's doing now, he was active in advocating and treating and providing refuge for HIV/AIDS patients. A man that just overflows with compassion. I'd like to share with everybody the voice of Dr. Julian Watkins.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Happy to be back with everyone. I was saying at the earlier service, it's really hard to believe that it's been almost a year since we last met. And, you know, a lot has changed in terms of the pandemic and globally. We've had a lot of wins, I think, as a nation. We've had a lot of setbacks, I think, as a species, as humanity, you know, especially seeing what's going on in the Ukraine. I think naming that it's really important in this moment. And I think as I was preparing to come before you in communion again, I've been reflecting a lot over the last few months. I'm not the type of person to make New Year's resolutions, but I do find some markers of transition to a new year, other periods, birthdays, other things, as a way to kind of reflect. I think it's important to always reflect and to really dig through lessons that were learned, what did work, what didn't work. I think having a critical, framework, a critical view of life and, the things that are going on, I think is important for growth. And so, I've been thinking a lot about the last 2 years. I think one main reason was because in my new role at the health department, I work as a health equity advisor in the Center for Health Equity within the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And basically for the last year, I've been primarily doing a lot of community engagement, talking to school groups and parent groups, PTAs, talking to faith communities, talking to other folks working at community-based organizations about vaccines, about treatments, but also just raising an awareness and really bringing in these conversations about recovery and healing and community building, especially across New York City, because, we were once an epicenter of the pandemic really early. And our city, we've lost nearly 40,000 people to date in our city alone, which is just a monumental amount of loss. And just knowing that a lot of people out there are hurting and a lot of folks' lives have been, dramatically changed as a result of this pandemic. And I think to really do the job well, I knew that I needed new approaches because the way that we do public health, we do medicine, I always felt like I wasn't operating with a full deck of cards. I felt like we see how the system works and we see the results that those system produces and we see who's always at the bottom. We see how all of the narratives always kind of explain it as, tilted in a way that it's always something missing with these people who are at the bottom. And I knew that was not real. And so I took an unconventional approach for this field and I actually kind of leaned into the humanities. I thought that if we're going to deal with these very human problems, we need to really turn to folks who are able to talk about the human experience and the human condition. So, I turned to the artists, folks who are writing about, love and death and disease, also about hope, and trying to find ways to kind of bring that energy to this work, to have these open-hearted conversations. And so my more recent reading, a piece that was printed in the Atlantic in June 2020 by the writer and professor Imani Perry really stood out for me. She wrote this piece called "Racism is Terrible, Blackness is Not." And I want to, I think the context of that piece written in the summer of 2020, where we saw millions of people in the street around the world demonstrating love and community solidarity and calling for a change and declaring that Black Lives Matter. I think that was a really important moment. And I found, so I just want to start the talk with a piece that really, a bit of that piece called "Racism is a Problem, Blackness is Not," that really resonated with me. So I'll start there. My elders taught me that I belonged to a tradition of resilience, of music that resonates across the globe, of spoken and written language that sings. If you had the good fortune to experience a holiday with a large Black American family, you have witnessed the masterful art of storytelling, the vitality of our laughter, and the everyday poetry of our existence. The narrative boils down quite simply to this: we are still here. Praise life. After everything, we are still here. So many people taught us to be more than the hatred heaped upon us, to cultivate a deep self-regard, no matter what others think, say, or do. Many of us have absorbed that lesson and revel in it. That sentiment ring very true to me, and I think a lot of folks on the call especially folks who come from Black American families or experience, probably really understand that sentiment as well. So for the talk, I'd like to talk a little bit, dig a little deeper in my experience in the tradition which I come from, and as we near the end of Black History Month, in this moment, with all of the things that we're facing against, it's my hope that you can gain something from this history and hope that you find something useful. Growing up in Georgia, very early in life, I started to grapple with these ideas of belonging, of community, and really trying to make sense of all of the contradictions going on around me. On one hand, seeing my people, seeing people loved for certain parts of us, celebrated for certain aspects of our culture, but at the same time being acutely aware of how we were constantly being framed or seen as a problem. Witnessing the contempt directed towards Black folks and Black speech and Black life in the news, seeing the veiled and not so veiled attacks against our community on the political stage, and then experiencing these indecencies, both large and small in my everyday life. It all felt so suffocating. It was so vulgar and it was so gratuitous. And it got to the point that many people really started to associate Blackness with this almost constant state of suffering, something that I knew in my experience and the experience of so many people that I knew and who were around me, that this was untrue. It felt so deep and it felt so much bigger than me. And so as a naturally inquisitive young person, I began to ask questions of my parents and seek answers and seek the truth. I searched and searched for new ways of understanding, desperately trying to make sense of this very peculiar situation. I'm the son of an African-American father. We come from old Mississippi folks, people who fled the racial apartheid of the American South as part of the Great Migration, where over 6 million Black folks left the apartheid of the South and moved in search for a better, for better futures, and helped contribute and further move and shape modern American culture, shape modern American cities in ways that are so present today. But I also had this other experience. My mom's from Central America. She's born in Panama and comes from Afro-Caribbean, indigenous, and European ancestry. She immigrated to this country as a young child. And I always felt this feeling of being at a crossroads, kind of torn between two worlds. At once here, part of this long tradition that's been in this country for more than 400 years, but then someone who, as a first generation to this country. And it was when I was in my early teens when I traveled to Panama for the first time where I felt a new sensation. And for the first time, I felt this sense of homeland and a sense of connection to a history, an ancestral home and belonging that existed beyond the American imagination, beyond American soil. I could see myself and my people just in a different light. And not to get too sentimental about Panama, because Panama, just like other parts of Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, has its own history of imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. And America plays a very distinct role in Panama, having occupied that country up until the year 2000. So it's very complicated, but I will say going there sparked something. I decided to dig deeper in our roots here, in African-American culture and African-American history, and explore our connection to this land, to this, the only homeland that we know. So I dove headfirst into the pool of Black genius. My quest led me to matriculate to historically Black universities, to learn my craft, but to also seek an education beyond school learning. First, I went to Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama, in the deep South, South that felt much deeper than the suburbs of Atlanta. That's where I got my biology degree. And then I went to Howard University, the Mecca, out in Washington, D.C. for medical school. During that time, I would voraciously read Black writers, figures like Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, Alice Walker, Dr. King, Howard Thurman, James Baldwin. I consumed Black art, listened to Black voices, and these people, these thinkers, these great thinkers helped shape the way I saw the world and my place in it. The grace and unwavering conviction to bear witness and speak the truth in the face of insurmountable odds against systems designed to silence and destroy. They offered a vital counter narrative in the face of these dominant narratives that were bombarding my sensibilities. Their thoughtful testimony was truly a source of inspiration and a balm in some of the darkest days. And in seeking a deeper understanding of my people, just a people that Lorraine Hansberry described as love's troubadours, a people who have loved when all reason pointed to the uselessness and foolhardiness of love. I really began to understand and really focus on the assets that we do have and think about where we've come from, how far we've come, what we've achieved, how marvelous it was. The fact that we've survived many Armageddons, the Armageddon of the Middle Passage, the horrors of chattel slavery. We survived the Jim Crow South. We survived Reaganomics. We survived the prison industrial complex, and we are still here, and we still know about love. So growing up, when we were kids on the way to school, when our dad would go to drop us off, as a preacher, he would always be preaching at us, imparting his knowledge and his life lessons that he wanted to give to his boys. And most of the times we would roll our eyes and, as most kids do when parents give a message, but something really stuck with me that he said, and I think it rang all the more true in recent years, when he would tell us, never forget where you came from. No matter how successful you are, never forget where you came from. And so, when this pandemic started, even before the lockdown, seeing what was coming, I somehow felt as if I had been preparing for this my whole life. I truly felt like I was part of something bigger, which in turn made me feel bigger. It made my heart feel bigger. It made my love feel bigger. Big enough to face the pain and suffering that was ahead with dignity and grace. Big enough to face this monumental problem and this tragedy which was unfolding before us and whatever else could come our way, but also big enough to bear witness and speak the truth without buckling under the weight of this situation. It was a revolutionary process. It wasn't big and bombastic because this was just a revolution of the heart. And so for the next few minutes, I'd like to discuss this revolutionary legacy, this legacy of hope, and talk about some important features, I think, of the Black American tradition. I think first I'd like to acknowledge how remarkable it is that so much of African American cultural practice, this Black American identity, and how much of the American identity is directly connected to traditions of Africa. And thinking about how so many of these traditions have survived. They survived the Middle Passage. They survived state-sanctioned violence and efforts to remove us, to break these bonds and all connections to a past that existed beyond this place. I think it's important that we name ourselves, we name our history, and we name the things that are important to us, these values and principles that we stand for. Not to prove anything to anybody, because that's not something that we have to do, but to do it for ourselves so that we don't forget, so that we don't lose sight of the tools that have served us for hundreds of years and continue to serve us, so that we can focus our energies on making the space for healing and change with all of ourselves. And so the first feature I'd like to talk about is the concept of Sankofa. Sankofa is a phrase from the Akan language. The Akan people are an ethnic group mostly located in modern day Ivory Coast and Ghana. And the Akan people, this phrase Sankofa literally means to go back and get it. Or another translation is to look to the past to inform the future. And when I, in my studies, when I'm thinking about Sankofa and trying to describe it, it feels more like an energy or an essence than just like a truism that people would say to themselves. Symbols of Sankofa generally are represented with a symbol of a mythical bird, which is with its body facing forward, representing the future, but with its head turned back. And with this turned back head, it has an egg, and it's holding an egg in its mouth. And the egg represents the gems or the wisdom of the past. But the egg also represents the generation to come that would benefit from that wisdom, from those gems. The Akan people deeply believe that the past illuminates the present, and that the search for knowledge is a lifelong process. I think that this is such a vital aspect of Black American cultural practice. Thinking about Sankofa and its presence in our early spirituals that were sung during our time in captivity, a music that led to the genesis of America's most popular musical traditions and truly changed the world. The spirit of Sankofa is in our literature, it's in our poetry. It's throughout our early and modern Black arts movements. We even sprinkle it in our food. I see Sankofa energy in this celebration of Black History Month. And I see it as reminding ourselves that we are more than our current circumstances, that we can and should be looking back to find the gems of the past that can help us in whatever moment we find ourselves in and whatever trials that we see ourselves facing. But it's also reminding us that we have to always face the right direction. Even if the journey ahead is long, as long as we're facing the right direction, that's a start. Another main feature of the Black American tradition is community. I think that the proverb attributed to many African cultures, it takes a village to raise a child, summarize that sentiment best. And I think it's this focus of a sense of community and less of a focus on self. And I think in modern dominant narratives that try to break up, that try to separate us from this history, new terms and devices have been devised to break up our communities, to break up the Black family. And I find it interesting that phrases are only attributed to Black folks, such as phrases like Black on Black crime, to otherize us in a way that all other people of all other races and ethnicities tend to, if they do crime, they do it within their own communities. But we are the only people who have this phrase that tries to place this wedge between us and ourselves. And really thinking about our history, across time, Black Americans have always cared for ourselves. We've always faced these direct threats from the outside system, from the larger system. We've had to look for our own solutions and create our own systems and create our own ways of existing to survive. Recounting accounts of plantation life and tales of survival during the Reconstruction era, listening and reading testimonies of folks living in segregated towns in the Jim Crow era, my own family included, they were always speaking with fondly about these experiences, about the community that they lived in, speaking to a sustaining power, this legacy of care and mutuality, people pooling meager resources to take care of strangers and to care for the downtrodden, people living a life of purpose, of social purpose that affirms our collective experience despite what the larger society thought, said, or did toward us. These values of community have a deep, deep, deep connection to the Black church. And this sense of communalism is everywhere in our lives. And I don't see this as a naive or a parochial choice. I think that it's a very complex phenomenon. And that's expresses itself and manifests in many different ways. Toni Morrison, in a lecture entitled City Limits, Village Values, Concepts of Neighborhood in Black Fiction, really described it well. And she laid out this, what she called village values. This common theme throughout Black life and Black literature. She even described, even in Black urban literature, that there was always this village presence which was being acknowledged. Black folks tended to focus on the community within these larger city structures or nation states, and just focusing on community. not expressing this romantic allegiance to these larger structures that were actively violent against them, to the state that was sanctioning this violence. During in modern times and throughout the COVID pandemic, we saw this manifest in so many different ways. This legacy of village values, countless acts of kindness, selflessness, folks performing mutual aid, changing the entire directions of their lives, people maintaining community fridges across New York City, and really closing in their ranks to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. The spirit of community and love stood out as like a beacon of hope in this society that focuses on rugged individualism and really embraces capitalistic values. The next feature that I really wanted to highlight and share is this the Ancestor Presence. There's this wise, protecting Ancestor Presence, which offers guidance and lights our paths. It's, it takes the form of family members, friends, members of community, and those in in the larger setting, who really showed care and left an impression on our lives, even before they even met us. Who performed the work, as James Baldwin said, is they paid the ticket. They paid the price of our ticket before us, before we were born. And reflecting on my own life and my own experience, thinking about my paternal grandmother, someone who I never met, someone who died more than 10 years before I was even born, but who I've been mourning for my entire life, someone who I could feel moving throughout my life in my relationship with my father and my aunt, and always being reminded of the little things about me that reminded my family about her. Thinking about our ancestors, these people whose memories we honor with our lives, these people who we want to make proud, who offer this wisdom and power steadily and regularly. It's always available to us. Some people call them heroes, but a lot of times we call them ancestors. And thinking about them as these figures that can offer comfort but don't coddle us, because part of the ancestor, the strength of the ancestor, is their deep and intimate understanding of the difficulties of this world. They understand the value of truth, the need to bear witness, and how deeply connected our survival is to seeing the world as it is. We've been educated and trained to dismiss these indigenous beliefs that are native to us, especially our connection to ancestors, and thinking about all the different ways that the dominant culture has tried to separate us from these points of access to the past. Thinking about Black folk traditions, Black folk religions, and spiritual practices that offered an access to different worlds and different parts of ourselves that the Western heart trembles before. Considering how there's particular disdain and contempt for all of these traditional Black or African religions, and all the efforts made to discredit them and label them as primitive or dark or demonic, really erases the rich history and this really rich cultural practice. Trying to identify all of these cultural traditions, it became really clear to me that it all essentially boils down to love. And the dominant culture definitely frames love and tries to even flatten and diminish love into just romantic love. Romantic love is a feature of this Black American tradition, but it's a minor one. I'm talking about something much deeper, much bigger, something that can't be commodified or wrapped with a bow, something that's bigger than a feeling of butterflies in the stomach. Examples of it are everywhere within our tradition, not just in our liberatory tradition, or not just even in our religious traditions, but also our secular traditions as well. And thinking about love and what that tradition offers in the Black context, I think about the Greeks, and the Greeks had over 7 words for love, but none of those definitions span space and time the way that the spirit of Sankofa does. It's this love supreme that Coltrane described, or love as defined by the dearly departed writer and professor Bell Hooks, who passed in December, when she defined love as the combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. When we talk about love in the Black context, love is work. I talk about love a lot in my work. I also talk about a lot in my personal life, and I do it on purpose. It's not by chance. No, I believe that it's important that we name love and that we question it, its value, we question its place in our lives, that we study it, that we try to understand how we can use it for its protective and sustaining qualities. I don't take it lightly at all. You know, when I look at this world and the violence and the lovelessness and all of the suffering around, when I see this clear and present danger of global climate disaster and the lack of imagination and the lack of urgency to meaningfully respond on a global scale, I think about love and what it means to, you know, to have this sense of respect and responsibility. And I think we could all, I think the time has come for us to ask these really important and serious and uncomfortable questions, not just of our country, but of ourselves, you know, to take an inventory of the things that we've inherited as Americans, to look in the mirror and really look for the good things, but also look and find and identify and weed out the bad. These other things that are affecting us and moving in our society, moving in our own psyches and hearts, both historically and today. And I think it's really important to kind of do that so we can understand and identify the causes of all of the hate and the difference and all of the domination that we see. And so another offering from Bell Hooks was this framing of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. I use this framing a lot in my work too, having these deeper conversations, because I think it's important that we expand the language and that we name all of these distinct, but also intersecting forces, so that we can gain this deeper understanding and that we can make efforts to develop tools specific to counteract these forces and to dismantle these evils wherever they may manifest, at home or abroad. So start by kind of unpacking imperialism a little bit and thinking about how the forces of imperialism are working right now in our own country. You know, thinking about this myth of American exceptionalism, the history of empire, the sentiment of give me liberty or give me death, and just seeing how it manifests. Our own imperial holdings, the fact that we had a genocide and named it Manifest Destiny, and the fact that so much of our economy is based on a war economy and has been for the greater part of the last 100 years. But, you know, as we were speaking earlier, looking at what's going on in the headlines this week, looking at the Russian aggression in Ukraine, you know, the city of Kiev is being attacked right now as we speak, and understanding that it's all the imperial pinings of a madman on a greedy quest for power to replace another old empire, the Soviet Union. The next evil that I want to name is patriarchy. This belief in the inherent superiority of the male gender. This evil that fuels these legislative attacks on life-saving medical treatments, and thinking about the derivatives of patriarchy, transphobia and homophobia. These things that have created a form of modern day McCarthyism in Florida and Texas, where people, doctors, citizens are being asked to report trans and queer families and children, these precious people seeking life-saving care. I also want to talk about capitalism because I think it's really important. You know, we live in this capitalist system and we're told that this is the only way. But the last few months have really shown what can happen when capitalism goes unfettered. Thinking about the billionaires who are in their own private space races, bolstered by the surplus profits that they made during this pandemic, the spoils of a class war, these fortunes that were made on the backs of workers, people of all races, of all ethnicities, of all gender identities, people who are being forced to stand on their feet for greater than 12-hour days with minimal bathroom breaks, people living with trying to survive and work with subpar COVID protections. I see capitalism as an all-consuming fire with a penchant for human flesh. I think finally, what we need to talk about is this delusion of white supremacy. And I say delusion because it is a delusional state. You know, it is a pathology. Looking at how it manifests, this belief in the dominance and superiority of one race above all, and the ownership and the sovereignty over the land, air, and sea, and the future of the entire species. This stain of racism and white supremacy is a curse on our country, and has touched so many aspects of our lives, but it's also present across the world. It holds a vice grip on the imaginations of so many people in our country. Look at our broken criminal justice system. Marking 10 years since the death of Trayvon Martin, how far have we come? Look at the prison industrial complex in this country. You know, look at all of the prison economies that are propped up across this country. But also look at the culture wars that are being waged in the classroom. People are banning books. People are making laws attacking the teaching of our history. And they're actually attacking the future of our past. These are all juvenile and transparent attempts to enshrine age-old myths and justify crimes against humanity, and an attempt to erase so many people. These lies are designed to reproduce ignorance and to maintain old power dynamics. You know, over the last few minutes, I laid out some of the most serious threats to our future, to the future of our species, to the future of our planet, to raise our collective consciousness so we know what we're up against, but also to deliver a warning. These forces are also not just moving to build power, they're designed to function as a distraction, as a cruel spectacle designed to grab the attention, capture the eye, and to paralyze us, to take us out of the game. They're meant to divide and conquer and to distract us and keep us from our work, so that bad actors, people who are acting in bad faith, can continue to steal our resources and continue to use our power against us. We get caught up in this process of defending ourselves, explaining ourselves, describing ourselves, and trying to prove our worth in the eyes of people in a system that was never designed to see us as more than a commodity. We were never meant to survive in this system. We've inherited all of those evils and many other things as Americans, these broken systems, these lies and these omissions, these legacies of domination, these myths of exceptionalism and power. But I'm so grateful that that's not all that we've inherited. We've also inherited these legacies of hope, these traditions of resilience. These are forces that have been active in this country since before its founding, people who have been fighting for freedom and liberty and justice for all. When I think about the Black American tradition, which has shown the power of love in the face of many Armageddons, which has demonstrated the urgency which we should be moving with to create and nurture these spaces for healing, restoration, and reckoning. You know, I think we have to ask ourselves this question: why not choose love? Why not lean into the best of us? Why not learn from love and apply its principles to our own lives? Why not turn our attention to ourselves and to our work? Why not care for ourselves and not focus on those who are hell-bent on destroying us, but focus on building ourselves up, fortifying ourselves, tapping into our own power? Love is what we need to face this world for what it is. Love is what we need to see others beyond perceived difference. Love is what we need to acknowledge our blind spots and to expand our capacity for care and nurturing for others. Love is one of our most powerful tools for change. When I think about where I've come from, where my people have come from in this Black History Month, you know, people who have survived extraordinary circumstances, people who have faced cruelty with no bottom, who have stared death in the face and survived and have thrived the whole time knowing love and showing love against all odds. We forged ourselves in the mouth of this American dragon, this empire, the richest and largest, most well-armed empire that the world has ever known, which has been hell-bent on our destruction from the moment we were dragged here. And yet we are still here. and we know love. That's why when I think about the Black American experience, that's why I'm not overcome with sadness. When I look at all this history and all of this pain, and to think that despite it, we've been able to accomplish so much. That's why I refuse sadness. That's why I refuse to be the victim. And when I think about it, truly think about it, yes, this is a very particular history, but it's a very particular American story, you know, and it does belong, but it doesn't just belong to the sons and daughters of this country's formerly enslaved. When I think about this experience, I think about it on a human level and think about what more human experience is there than ours. Think about our legacy and how it actually doesn't belong to us. It actually belongs to the entire human family, that it belongs to all of us. Another personal hero of mine, Alice Walker, once said, "Anything we love can be saved." This is a sentiment I believe with all my heart and soul. If human actions can change the global climate, imagine what we could do if we collectively do our work, if we choose the best of us and come together to address these problems of the heart. If we do our work, if we let go of the things that we've inherited that have never served us or no longer serve us, if we let go of old ways of thinking, old ways of relating to ourselves, to others, old ways of relating to the earth, if we courageously move through whatever guilt or shame or fear we may have, if we go back and get the wisdom of the past, if we stay facing forward, facing the right direction, and tap into that imagination and tap into our human ingenuity, imagine the new futures that we could create. We should never forget that in this game, there is no net neutral when we're dealing with oppression and marginalization, because these things are being done and said in our name as Americans, as people living in this land. They're using our tax dollars, our hard-earned tax dollars, to do these things. So I invite everyone today, as lovers of freedom, people of all backgrounds, I invite you to imagine. I invite you to consider these stories that we share during Black History Month, consider these heroes, and to study them, to scour these histories for something useful, to use them to reconnect to your power, to find comfort in them. Let them become as familiar to you as your favorite song. Let them be a lens for new visions, for new futures. I hope you can dream in the brilliant, colorful language of freedom, because I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. You know, the impression I'm getting is, you know, from time to time we'll hear a report of somebody, usually a man, sometimes a couple or whatever, but they hold somebody captive, usually a child or a woman, in their basement or somewhere. And sometimes they're there for years. And I kind of feel like what you are saying to us, Dr. Watkins, is something like the need to readjust to a whole world that we have missed, a whole way of being that that just, you know, it can be shocking. You know, you go out, maybe you've been locked up and you come out and you've never seen a cell phone or whatever. You know, the world has changed. Borders for countries have changed. Do you get the impression, do you get the feeling sometimes that you're speaking almost a different language?
I don't know if it's a different language, but I think it's a different perspective. I think that folks need a new vision. You know, it's offering a vision, something that is widely available to us and we don't even know it. And helping folks understand that the things that have been handed to us, the things that we find ourselves trapped in, that has all been on purpose. It's not circumstance. And helping folks understand that even though the world outside is the way it is, this is not the natural state of things.
Yeah.
Helping folks to understand that this legacy and history of the Black American experience and this history and spirit of abolition was literally this movement to create a world that had never existed on this land. Up until abolition and emancipation, Black people had never been free. This land we had never been free. And it's us collectively working with people across different backgrounds, coming together and say, this is unjust, and we can build new futures, new realities that we're living in, and thinking about segregation, thinking about how we move beyond that. So we think it's about offering folks letting folks know that new futures are always being created, and there are new realities that we can all move towards. I think it's just helping folks understand that we're so much more powerful than these elected officials. We're so much more powerful than people would let us believe.
You referenced the billionaire space race, and I flashed on Diane and I had watched it before, but she hadn't, so we watched together this week. We watched the Summer of Soul on Disney, I think on Hulu or whatever, 1969. And something that really stood out for me that I didn't notice the first time is that they were interviewing people in Harlem at this music festival that went the entire summer. It was also the same summer of the first moon landing. And they were interviewing the people in the crowd, and they were saying, what do you think about the moon landing? And they were saying things like, well, it's an advance for science, that kind of thing, but it doesn't mean anything to me. What meant anything to them was the fact that these thousands, over the course of the summer, 300,000 Black people gathered in Harlem. What mattered to them was their village, their solidarity, where they could find healing. And so this, what I'm wondering, the problems that you mentioned, I'm watching. It seems like a lot of Black folks have joined the rat race. And we're talking about capitalism, patriarchy, history erasure, all of that stuff that you mentioned. Black people jumped into the race, and then some of us have noticed that there are white folks who like, we're trying to catch up, and they slowed down. They're like, this is not all it's cracked up to be. And so it's almost like we're running in this race, and we see white folk coming back, coming back this way. And it's kind of confusing, I think. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you exclude folks from a thing that is so glossy, so shiny, so brand new for so long, you can't really blame folks for wanting to get a piece of that, right? We've been living in an American nightmare where many people are coming here looking for an American dream. And so you see folks who are coming from these marginalized experiences, oppressed experiences, and you can't help but blame them to kind of like tap into this shiny thing, but I think what we all could understand is that even billionaires are unhappy. It doesn't feed the soul, because you can only spend but so much money. You can only buy so many houses, so many boats, go on so many trips before you understand that it's all nothing. These are all things. These are things of no value and no worth. You even have your name on some building that's going to crumble one day. None of it really matters, and it's about helping folks understand that part, but offering something to folks that can help them understand and see themselves as part of something bigger beyond just the amassing commodities.
You're reminding me of I read Will Smith's autobiography, and he talks about the point where his career just skyrocketed you know, especially with that album that had Parents Don't Understand. And he was a mega celebrity, but then his career took a dive and he was broke. I mean, literally broke. He couldn't buy a plane ticket. And his reflection was something like what you're saying. He said, you know, if you become rich and famous, well, let me put it this way. He said, if you don't get a break, if things don't work out for you, you can always blame the system for your dissatisfaction and you know, your lack of completeness in life. But he says, once you've had those things and you're on your way down, you got nobody to blame because you know what it's like, and it never met your needs. It never satisfied you, even though you had all this stuff. So, you know, I want to make sure that anybody else gets a chance to weigh in, but I just want to say that I feel like you just poured yourself into us today in both sessions. You just like, and Shella put in chat, we just heard Black history as human history. And I think that's where we're connecting with you, that we're connecting with you in that very vital way. Who else? Anybody else?
If I can just jump in, Dr. Watkins, thank you so much for the connection, especially to the ancient culture of Africa, because I feel often as an American that I'm rootless. I have nothing to draw from. And one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to Jesus Collective is that I'm hearing stories of resilience and of love and community that I never had before. So thank you so much, because I'm wanting to look into all of this.
You're very welcome. I mean, I think one of the things that I still try to make sense of is thinking about all these people who went through these, you know, remarkable times, you know, faced horrors, you know, unheard of horrors, and you know, what people went through, but they still found a way to pass a sense of worth and value, you know, a sense of love to their children, despite what everything said. You know, it's such a powerful thing. And I think for me, knowing that's where I came from, I just really trying to go deeper and really trying to understand what that human spirit is. And I think as I try to investigate it and try to understand it, I found that it's not something that's uniquely that's unique to us. It's a human thing, you know. And I think understanding that we're not magical, that we are just flawed flesh and blood, just anyone else on this world, knowing that we contain this potential, and knowing that every other human does too, that we are not made out of concrete. We are made out of flesh and blood, you know. Amen. That we can change, and that we can find hope and inspiration from people who may not look like us. We can find hope and inspiration from people coming from different places, you know. And it's like, wherever you get it, wherever you find that peace, like whatever guides you to that peace, through that peace, it's all open, it's all there, and it's all available to us. And really helping folks understand that even in this country was designed to make us feel separate from something beyond this country, to disconnect us from histories beyond capitalism and patriarchy, you know, and white supremacy. Mm-hmm. It's designed to do that, so that we feel disempowered and feel lost, so that all we do is try to figure out with this little system that's going on right here. But this world is so much bigger than this place, you know, and humanity is extends, you know, back in time and into the future beyond this place too. And we can tap into that.
Yeah.
I see Linnea's hand is up. Okay. You're muted, I think.
I've been sifting through the issues of power and the American dream. And I remember in Summer of Soul, they were saying, yeah, the space program It's all very impressive, but couldn't they channel a little money here to those of us who need it? And then one night in Miami, they were talking about Black Power, and they're on the verge of this Black Power movement. And somebody defined it as just having enough to be able to be yourself, to be who you are, and to live into that. And I'm wondering if the seeking of that kind of power on an you're saying that power is love. So is that a contradiction of what whoever it was in that movie said? Power is being economically able to be who you are.
I think that, power looks many different ways, and we're living and functioning within a capitalist society. I think that money is something, and I think that it's a tool for it can be used as a tool for our collective liberation. Money is a resource that makes the world go, that operates human society. Money can be used to actually save the world. So I'm not like go off the grid and just go to the mountains. I think it's a combination of what you do with that power, with understanding what you do with that resource that is money, and knowing that it's not everything. It's just another tool that we can use.
Okay.
And I see Galaxy. That must be Hasmin, maybe?
Hasmin and Rosie, yes. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your contribution to just to be able to start the week this way. I guess I'll turn on the video. I was in tears on my way over here, and Linnea and Mommy Diane, and just telling in our group, saying hello, just telling them how I miss my dad so much, and all of what you were saying about humanity and our ancestors and history being so much more than the bubble that we're taught to believe that it is, amongst everything else that you shared. It just really resonated with me, and it's such a privilege of mine to have expressed such profound gratitude to my dad and my mom. We watched Summer of Soul together, and so much of what was beautiful about it was the coalitions that came to light, that were there, but maybe not as many people were tapped into them without that platform. And just like today, there are a lot of folks that see the big picture about what's going on with wars internationally, but their own pocketbooks don't allow for them to have the patience and understanding that some might have with regards to how everything's just going to keep getting expensive. And so in that sense, money, like Doctor was saying, it is definitely a tool that can be used to liberate folks, but it's also so much of what keeps people down and is used as a tool to control and distract and yeah, that's just a little bit. But I really value all of that was shared today, Dr. Watkins. I think you're amazing, and may you be blessed. I wish I knew you in real life.
Yeah.
We do. We know each other. You know, we've been in communion twice now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of this moment, that we at least are able to find these connections, using technology. And that, a thing that so this week was a really hard week for, the Department of Health family. One of our coworkers was violently attacked on the way to the train station right by our work, like attacked with a hammer.
Oh my God.
And so, when we got the news, it was a shock to everyone's system. We came together, and, when we go through trials and dark times, there's this tendency for us to kind of like close in on ourselves, to, build this shell or build these walls and close our hearts. But talking to the group, I think it's worth sharing and naming in this space too, that I think that these are the times that we should do the opposite. We should actually open our hearts. If we open our hearts, we'll chew love and chew the pain and the hurt. We'll see that other folks are walking around with open hearts too. And like a beacon, you'll find each other and you'll connect and you'll build that beloved community. And then you'll see that it's not just people who look like you, people who speak the same language, but it's people who come from various different walks of life, who will be there to support you and hold you up and be in community with you.
Amen.
And so, yeah, I mean, whatever we can do to keep these open hearts and build these beloved community and nurture them, especially in times like these, where so many people have lost so much. This is the time for that.
And so many more are in the verge of losing so much with all that is taking place. I wanted to say something in reference to what Linnea shared about when she spoke about the word power. And I love the way that you, Doctor, basically stated, it's not just one definition. It isn't just one definition. And going back to the movie that she was sharing, I think that in that time frame, the coalescing of the Black movement, from all different walks, to come together and express, their desire for creating that power within, could seem like a nationalistic move. And at the time, I feel like it was a necessary. I feel that even right now, it continues to be a necessary, not just Black power, but brown power, but Asian power, but people power in general. And I think that we need to understand it and see it for the beauty of what was then being trying to be taught. I was very impressed to hear, Doctor, that you also are Panameño. And yes, the rich history, but like you stated as well, the imperialism, that exists. Well, we know who we can quote unquote thank for those type of situations, of realities, livelihoods taking place all over the globe, for that matter, because it's a global thing. But my indigenous background is of the Purapeche indigenos, and tracing it back, it's really amazing to realize that the tribe is only one or two that the Aztecas were not able to conquer, going back that far. We're all related. We are all one people, truly, but I feel need to be open, like you said, our hearts, so that we can attract all of the others, you know, that God and through the Holy Spirit will guide us to attract, to teach and to learn from each other. And if I could
Well,
just say
let
one
me
more
say,
thing.
that Hasmin and Rosie, I'm so glad you came on camera because your beauty is uplifting all of us. But I wanted to move on because it's so late, but I wanted to take in what
one more thing.
Shella's, if you would just go ahead and elaborate on, you know, your chat statement before we have communion.
Oh, I was just saying, you know, with everything that's being taught right now, I mean, all of the issues against just teaching history, just being honest, being real, being true, being, you know, with all of the issues that are against that. And what you did to me, I remember in I think it was 94, at my daughter's high school, Channel Islands, they had this whole warning about someone was coming on campus and they had a gun and they were gonna shoot and all that. And my daughter began to cry. Well, she told me later, she said, Mama, I saw everyone separate. All the Mexicans went there, the Asians went there, and the whites went there. And she said, but I had friends in every group, and what was I supposed to do? Can you even imagine how you taught history right there as human history? If we all knew that, would that happen? Wouldn't we understand that we are all part of each? I just appreciate you so much right there. Just how you gave that. It felt so good. It felt so good to hear you teach like that.
And thank you, Shella. And Trina she's on her phone because she had to take my nephew Donovan somewhere to an event in LA. And I don't know if she's got a good enough signal, but I sure would love to have you weigh in if you can, Trina. Hello? She is driving. All right.
There she is.
Okay.
Here, I just appreciate everything that was shared, and you know, coming from a place of being in education and teaching history and understanding how important the lived experience is part of that. Knowing, as you know, with my students every month being Black History Month, and would often say, you know, we celebrate Black History Month every month, but February is for the white people. So we have a chance to really embrace and look at the ways in which we as a people, regardless of circumstance, I think the strength and the beauty and the courage and the talent and the intellect and the capacity and so many other things, and I see that in what was presented today, and just want to thank the doctor for reinforcing that of who we are and who we are in our humanity.
Thank you for that. Well, family, let's have communion.